Hello, hello.
It's my birthday.
It is your birthday. I'm so happy I get to be back to celebrate. I feel like I haven't been on in so long.
14 years ago.
It's been 84 years. And I can still smell the fresh paint. Sorry, it's your birthday, not mine. It's not Titanic.
That was time. Titanic, yeah.
Anyway, happy birthday, Jaim.
Thank you. 27. It's my birthday. Guess what I'm doing on my birthday? I mean, you know, but...
Do I?
Maybe, I think so. I'm having a birthday party. It's Summerween. But it's not pool like swimming. It's pool like dualies, like playing. I look like I'm, jerking someone off with that.
You
but
do.
Yeah,
billiards is what you're referring to.
8-ball.
Is that what that? I guess, yeah.
I don't know.
In my brain, I was gonna say that's bowling. That's 8-pin.
No. Yeah, welcome to Creeps and Coffee. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. It's just, this is my birthday.
As per usual, we are...
And this is what we're celebrating by doing.
This is my favorite thing about our show, quite frankly. And I'm going to throw it back to my favorite comment that we refer to all the time, of that guy who was like, wow, what an interesting topic. I would have loved to know more, except I couldn't handle the giggling of the co-host.
I wish they would shut the fuck.
Yeah. And you know what? Most people do. So we started a podcast so that everyone could hear us, not shut the fuck up all the time.
I just think we're really funny, so sorry to that guy.
No, I'm not going to say sorry to that guy, because if you want a deep dive, super, not that we don't do deep dives and stuff like that, but if you want a super information-driven, narrative-style podcast, that's not us. The whole point of Creeps and Coffee is grabbing a coffee with your friend, having conversations with your girls the way that you normally would. And this is exactly how Jamie and I normally...
I like to think we're more so like the basement yard, but women.
The basement yard, but women talking about monsters.
Yeah.
And you know what? If that's not your style, that's okay.
If you don't have a sense of humor, that's okay.
If you're not funny, just say that.
Yeah, it's alright. We forgive you. Go listen to Joe Rogan. I don't know.
Anyway,
yeah.
It's
a birthday episode.
In the true spirit of Creeps and Coffee, it is a birthday episode. And as you all know, normally when it comes to birthday episodes for either Jamie or myself, we get to pick the topic that resonates with us the most, and we kind of get to really dive into it. When it's me, it's usually something Titanic or
big history.
Yeah. But with Jamie, it tends to be really creepy or gruesome. And this year is no exception. I don't know if I want to start with a trigger warning.
Yeah.
But I would say before we start, this episode does discuss violence against women, murder, and forensic detail, which can be considered graphic, but as per usual, we will not go into any gory, unnecessary details. Only what conveys the seriousness of the story. So listener discretion is advised. But get comfortable, because today, what are we talking about, Jamie?
Black Dahlia case.
I'm Kate.
And I'm Jaim, and this is Creeps and Coffee.
A show where we talk about the dark parts of the world around us.
Cryptids, conspiracies, things that go bump in the night.
And the crimes behind the scariest creatures of all, humans.
Join us as we take a look at the stories sure to give you the creeps.
Pull up a seat, grab a coffee,
and let's have a chat.
Yeah, I, number one, thought about doing this because I feel like we've always wanted to do it. Number two, this is one that I knew Caitlin would also like and definitely enjoy yapping about.
Absolutely.
And number three, I know it's cringy, the new Spider-Man movie is coming out soon. And I don't know if y'all remember, but MJ, her favorite flower is the Black Dahlia because of the case.
I was gonna say, where is this correlation gonna come from? But sure.
And then it felt like fate, because then when I started doing research, the day I was doing research for the episode, they released an article about new evidence.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I was very excited when you mentioned doing this one. It's definitely a case that's always stuck with me, and I think that's the reason it's kind of one of the more well-known cases, is that it's so bizarre that the details really do stick with most people who hear it, and especially people in sort of the true crime community as a whole. It's one of those cases that I hesitate to say it in this way, but it's kind of become a classic. But I think that's also the trouble with it, and I've talked about this before with similar cases of, like, it's become this sensationalized story that isn't necessarily remembered as a crime, and it's just this shock factor more than anything that people seem to talk about. And I think that's really unfortunate, because there's a person behind this at the end of the day, and her life was taken in a horrible, horrible way. And to be sensationalized the way it has without most people knowing the reality of her life is a real shame. So any chance that I can get to talk more about her and less about the Black Dahlia as a whole, I'm very happy to get the chance to do. I think that's what, not that we have the biggest platform in the world by any means, but anyone who has any level of a platform, I think that's what your voice should be used for, right?
Yeah.
Look at me, I'm on my soapbox already. We're 5 minutes in. Okay, well, we can dive right in if you're up for it.
Splash.
So I kind of going off of what we were just talking about, I think when most people hear Black Dahlia, first of all, they don't think of the flower, which is really unfortunate because it's a beautiful flower.
Gorgeous.
But they picture a sensational newspaper headline. They picture this glamorous young woman, a mysterious killer. It's all a very Hollywood interpretation of it. There's also a lot of conspiracy that's blinded the conversations, which I'm sure we will dive into more. But today, I really want to do something different with it. And I want to take this opportunity to approach it where, instead of making Elizabeth Short a supporting character in her own story, I want to get to know who she actually was before discussing what happened to her. Because somewhere along the way, Elizabeth became the Black Dahlia, and people forgot that she was a real person with a real identity, a real family, real loved ones. And I think it's very important to talk about that. So I think I've drilled that in enough. I'll stop making that point. But let's hop in our time machine, go back to Los Angeles in the 1940s. So why does the time machine make you breathe like that?
Oh, I was just going back in time. I'm on Quaaludes. I'm being beat by my husband. I'm back there.
That was good. I really enjoyed that. That was really good. So picture Los Angeles, 1946. The Second World War has just ended. Thousands of soldiers are returning home. Like Jamie said, there's a lot of PTSD.
Beating their wives.
They're beating their wives. Back to Hollywood. Hollywood's booming.
Right.
Movie stars are kind of at their I don't want to say their peak, but their...
It's like the glory days.
Yeah! That's a really good way of putting it. Like the classic, you picture all the glamour of the black and white, and it's all a big deal. everyone really believes that California is where dreams come true. It's that full Hollywood stereotype. But underneath that glamorous surface, we have to be realistic about the fact that all of those other factors mean that Los Angeles is changing significantly and is changing rapidly. So people are coming home. There's a lot of undiagnosed mental health things happening.
Mm-hmm.
All of the pressures of Hollywood are also throwing people for a loop. Crime rates are increasing, police departments are overwhelmed, and corruption is becoming increasingly more common. Newspapers are competing fiercely for the headlines of everything that's going on. And the more shocking the headline, the better, because it's going to grab people's eye at the newsstand. This idea becomes incredibly important later because the Black Dahlia investigation quickly transformed from a murder investigation into this media circus.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we can argue the case that social media, like, had something like that happened today, social media now would have made it a million times worse. It makes me think, looking at something like Gabby Petito a few years ago. Very quickly, it was all internet sleuths, which was great, don't get me wrong, but it very quickly became everyone knew Gabby and knew what the circumstance was, and it was this whole debacle, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for something like this, it would only make it a million times worse. There would be TikToks constantly, like,
oh yes,
I can't even imagine. But again, I want to talk about Elizabeth Short. Forget the Black Dahlia for a second, but just picture all of that stuff as the context for where Elizabeth found herself. Okay, so Elizabeth Short was born on July 29th.
Mm-hmm.
So another July baby, 2 days after Jamie, but 65 years before. So July 29th, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. She was one of 5 daughters, which, can't even imagine.
Mm-mm.
Her father was a man named Cleo. Cleo Short built miniature golf courses during the 1920s boom, which I love. I think that's so fun. But then, as we all know, the 1920s were not a notoriously wonderful year by the end of them. And then the Great Depression hit. So his business collapsed because in the midst of the Great Depression, people's priorities wasn't really miniature golf.
Yeah.
Which is really unfortunate. It's a missed opportunity. Lots of people could have been way happier if they were playing mini golf. You know what I mean? I'm making light of this because it gets very uncomfortable after this. So, one day, following the collapse of his business, his car was found abandoned on a bridge. And everyone assumed that he had taken his own life. Mm-hmm. Except he hadn't. So, years later, it was discovered that he had simply disappeared to California. He up and abandoned his life and tried to start over in a place where he wasn't considered a quote-unquote failure.
Yeah, crazy.
So, I think what's interesting to me about this for Elizabeth is you have to put yourself in her shoes and imagine being a little girl believing that your father had died and dealing with that grief, dealing with that trauma, only to learn that he had chosen to leave instead and chosen to abandon you and let you live in that grief. Like, I can't even begin to imagine the toll that would take for so many different reasons and the kind of scars that level of abandonment would leave. First of all, the belief that you were abandoned, but because he was in so much pain that he decided to end his own life, and while abandoning you wouldn't have been his thought, it's still the outcome of it.
Yeah.
Versus realizing that he chose to abandon you and was okay with it. All mixed together. Like, that has to be insane. On top of all that, Elizabeth was also struggling with health issues as a child. She had severe asthma, and doctors recommended warmer weather, clearer air. So, as a teenager, she began to spend winters in Florida. Friends described her as very polite, soft-spoken, romantic, and like many young girls at the time, and still now, fascinated with Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And like many young women, especially after the war, she dreamed of becoming an actress. Unfortunately, there's very little evidence that she was actively pursuing acting professionally. There's no auditions, and it's not now where we have like highlight reels of people and all of these records. That's one of the myths that would develop later as the story became more sensationalized. So she wasn't necessarily a famous actress waiting to be discovered. She was just a young woman who was trying to figure out adulthood, which is a big reason why I think this case resonates so much with me and with Jamie, is we know exactly what that feels like.
Yeah.
That's where we are.
Being a waitress at 22.
Yeah, like that's you're trying to figure your shit out. And you're trying to find stability. You're trying to ultimately find somewhere to belong. And that's what Elizabeth was trying to do.
I will speak on the fact that she was, not only did she have severe asthma, and like asthma attacks, she also had bronchitis, like frequently, and so she underwent like lung surgery at 15. And so that's,
So before we dive into what the case actually revolves around, I think it's time to talk about what this sort of myth of the Black Dahlia is not. And I think something that a lot of people don't realize, we've talked about this before, it's going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse. I'm really good at that. I really enjoy beating a dead horse over and over again. But the reality of cases like this, especially from this time frame, is that it was never the police coming up with these names. And it was never... It wasn't Elizabeth calling herself the Black Dahlia because it was some, like, actress name, like, stage name.
Yeah.
That's never what was presented. The nickname, like so many others, I think we talked about it with the Zodiac Killer, with the Son of Sam. This is a nickname that came after her death. And where it likely comes from was a popular noir film called The Blue Dahlia. Yeah. And it's sort of speculated that reporters had likely borrowed it from that film because...
I believe that 100%.
Well, 100%, because like we were saying before, the scene that I wanted to lay really at the beginning of this episode too is that everyone has to read the paper to get their news. So these newspapers are fighting for the most eye-catching title. And when you have something like, the Black Dahlia, it's gonna...
Unknown girl gets murdered, or the Black
Or
Dahlia.
the case of the Black Dahlia. That's gonna absolutely attract more people. Unfortunate, but it's still the case now. If you have something that's more eye-catching, especially, honestly, to talk about today for a second, especially...
Clickbait.
Yeah, especially when you're scrolling through Instagram Reels or TikTok and everything is so short-term, you need something that's going to catch people's attention and get them to stay on your article. It was the same thing, just obviously not on the phone. So, friends of Elizabeth had mentioned that she occasionally wore black clothing, and that was sort of what she was known for among them. And to the newspapers, that was enough. They created a brand, and from that point on, Elizabeth became a character instead of a victim. And journalists exaggerated almost everything about her and her life and the case itself. They claimed that she was mysterious and implied that she was involved with criminals and all these shady deals, and that she had this dangerous secret life. And most of that simply wasn't true. She drifted between friends. She struggled financially. She was, like we said before, she was a girl in her 20s trying to figure shit out. She had relationships that were absolutely scrutinized more than anything. And the reality there, too, is she wasn't this femme fatale that the newspapers and reporters wanted to portray her as. She was a regular person, so she wasn't starting off with the relationship side of things. She wasn't dating these mafia bosses and sneaking off with enemies and dating these scary people who retaliated. Like, it was none of those things. The last man that was known to have spent significant time with Elizabeth at all was a man named Robert Manley, which in a time of stereotypical male identities, I think it's hilarious for a man to have the last name Manley.
Well, that's how you know his penis is large.
Exactly. Robert Manley also went by Red, and he was a 25-year-old married salesman. So but the reality is,
Hey.
their relationship appears to have been completely platonic. Would I want my partner hanging out with a woman enough so that there's a significant correlation between the two of them? Probably not. But again, this is a very different time where you're not sneaking around and sending sneaky DMs and all of these things, right?
This is my wife and this is the mistress.
Exactly. So before anyone starts to speculate with that, it was supposedly platonic. And the last interaction that they had, Red drove Elizabeth from San Diego to Los Angeles on January 9th, 1947. He dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles around 6:30 p.m. And he said that Elizabeth told him she was meeting her sister there. It's possible she was meeting someone else or didn't want to explain her plans, but it was determined that she was not supposed to meet her sister there. That was never in the works.
Huh.
But Robert Manley will come back up later. But this relationship and this aspect of her life brings us to that time frame in Los Angeles. So January 1947 in LA. January 1947, Elizabeth was staying with friends. She spent several days moving around the area, meeting acquaintances, looking for work, looking for opportunities, and January 9th was the last time she was seen alive. Because 6 days later, everything would change. So on the morning of January 15th, 1947, we see a woman named Betty Bersinger, who was a 22-year-old homemaker, who was going for a walk with her 3-year-old daughter. So Betty and her daughter on January 15th were walking through, I really should have looked up how to say this, Limert Park.
I feel like Limert is right, but I'm usually wrong. So say the opposite of what
Awesome. A park neighborhood of Los Angeles. She was pushing a stroller along South Norton Avenue when she noticed what she thought was a discarded mannequin lying in a vacant lot. At first, she didn't think much of it, and to be fair, in her defense, during that time, department stores were discarding their displays And it might not be as common anymore to have mannequins that look more human, if that makes sense. I feel like now a lot of the mannequins are like those Lululemon ones that are like faceless, and you know what I mean?
They used to be people.
They used to be people, and they used to be scary. They
had hair and face makeup.
I hated looking at mannequins. But it wasn't uncommon for department stores to throw out their mannequins, and people go through trash, things get dumped out of trucks, whatever. There were mannequin parts around, you know what I mean? So it wasn't a complete shock or something super out of the ordinary for Betty to have seen. As she got closer, however, she realized that it was not a mannequin at all. She saw that it was the body of a young woman that had been severed cleanly at the waist, was completely nude, positioned with her arms above her head, deliberately posed, and almost the most shocking, at least to investigators, drained of blood and washed clean. Obviously a horrible thing for her to see, but an added horror onto that was she wanted to get her daughter away from it. So she quickly moved her daughter away from the scene and went to a nearby house to call the police. Keep in mind, again, this is before cell phones, long before, so she had to rely on knocking on a neighbor's door and hoping that somebody would let her use the phone.
Hey, I just saw a dead body. Can I call the police from your phone?
Like, can you imagine?
No one would let me in now.
No.
If I went around to my neighbors, they wouldn't answer the door,
No.
let alone let me in.
Exactly. So what I took as interesting about this interaction is, history-wise, 911 didn't exist yet. So the nationwide emergency number, it wasn't introduced till 1968. So in 1947, people contacted emergency services the same way you would do for like the non-emergency line now, where you call the local police station, or at that time you ask an operator to connect you to the police.
Oh, I don't like that.
No, it goes to show why something like 911 is important when you look at something like this.
I've never thought about a world without 911, so that's actually really scary.
Right? To think this is something that would have happened, like, someone could have been calling...
You had no backup.
Someone could be calling the same line for, like, oh, I need help, there's a kitten stuck in a tree, and I found this severed body, completely exsanguinated and horribly abused. And if police were off busy and dealing with the first call, the non-emergent call, they had to wait until someone was there to take the emergency. Right? So it's a fun little history sprinkle in there for you folks. So when detectives arrived, Betty was able to tell them straight away that she had not touched the body, that she had initially mistaken it for a mannequin, and that the body appeared to have been intentionally arranged. Betty didn't think from the glance that she got that she had fallen in that way. And this observation really reinforced a belief that would come up that the killer had posed the body purposely to ensure that it would not only be discovered, but that it would create the maximum shock, which it certainly did.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this as I was kind of going through the case, and the psychological impact that something like that would have had on Betty must have been insane. Like, first of all, it's a horrific scene. Obviously, that's going to be traumatizing regardless. But add on to it the amount of people that most likely wanted to interview her and get her perspective on it. And she really only spoke to investigators. She didn't, like, now you see a lot of people doing YouTube videos about, like, their loved ones, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
or it wasn't a circumstance like that for her. She kept very to herself about it. But just the thought of even seeing it everywhere in newspapers or hearing it on the radio, hearing people talking about it, and having to constantly be re-exposed to that trauma, that would become one of the most infamous and horrific cases, I would argue, in U.S. history. I can't even imagine. And to be only 22 on top of that, like, that's insane. But further to that point, thinking of how, like, the impact of things, if Betty had stayed on the opposite side of the street, or if she decided to take a different route that morning, it's interesting to consider how long it might have taken for Elizabeth's body to be found, and what could have changed if someone else found it. Would they have touched it? Would they have panicked and tried to, you know what I mean? How would it have changed what investigators
run
learned?
away and not call 911.
Exactly.
Not call the police.
Yeah. But exactly, we don't know if someone did see it beforehand and just never said anything, right? So it's interesting how little things like that can, it's all the butterfly effect, right? If you don't make this decision, you don't get to this point. So, going back up. So with all of the very visible atrocities that had been done to this body, investigators quite quickly realized that this was not where this woman had been killed. The body had been dumped, and it had been deliberately posed. And this is where the case shifts to become one of the most fascinating unsolved murders, just in terms of sheer psychopathy, I think, in maybe not psychopathy, maybe sociopathy, the sheer illness of whoever did this.
Because, like, I wondered that too, because when I saw that, I've never actually saw the pictures of, like, her face or anything after the fact. But it's got the Glasgow smile, so, like, the cuts.
I'll talk about that.
My immediate thought was, who is doing this, and why are they doing that?
Yeah.
That specific one.
Exactly.
You want her to be happy, and I think it was done postpartum.
Postpartum?
Nope, postpartum.
There you go.
But I'm wondering, like, why?
Well, exactly. I liken it a lot to the Ripper cases.
I think it's a man.
Wow. I'm confident. But I liken it a lot to the Jack the Ripper cases, where there was such a high level of fuckery, for lack of an intelligent term, that it's just, you really have to wonder how someone could be that sick. So the precision is what really gets people talking, and what led to sort of one of the bigger theories surrounding her death. So Elizabeth's, I can't say TH and S together. It's like a sixth. Elizabeth's. Her body, this is not a time to laugh. This is a horrible thing.
Yes. It's not funny, Caitlin.
No, I know it's not. I'm just laughing at my own inability to speak. Her body had been cut cleanly between the lumbar vertebrae. So it wasn't like it was a random hacking where someone cut her in half. It suggested...
It was on purpose.
It suggested that there was anatomical knowledge, that someone knew what they were doing, and at least had some sort of background in meat, as horrible as that is, in flesh. So,
or medicine.
Well, that's where I was going with the flesh side of things, is a lot of investigators believed, and still believe, that the killer had some sort of medical training, whether that be doctor, nurse, whatever it is, or mortician, or experience as a butcher, as horrible as that is. So
I prefer doctor. I don't want to.
I don't prefer any of them, but
Well, yes.
the realistic thing is that it wouldn't necessarily had to have been a surgeon, but someone with practical anatomical experience could have and most likely would have been the one to perform this level of dismemberment, which is insane. And further to that was the lack of blood. So the full exsanguination process, there was almost no blood. Like, the body was drained, which again tells investigators that she was murdered somewhere else, without a doubt.
Which is why they also, the woman who found her said that, like, she thought she was a mannequin because she was so pale. Because there was no blood.
Yeah, there was nothing. Which is, maybe that's my issue.
You need more blood?
Probably. I need more iron in my blood, that's for sure. Anyway.
That is true.
So, again, it's almost certain she was murdered somewhere else because exsanguination is not a fast process to fully clear all of the blood out of someone's body, but it's also a very messy process. There would be a lot of blood. So it would have been on the grass, it would have been on the pavement, it would have been somewhere, and it just wasn't. So not only does that show that it took considerable time, but also it took privacy and it took planning. This was not, oh, I'm going to randomly cut this woman and let her bleed.
Yeah.
Like, you had to have a plan in place.
Dare we say premeditated?
We dare.
I don't know necessarily if it was premeditated towards her,
Or
but
in general.
premeditated towards, I need to kill somebody.
Absolutely.
You're right here. Perfect. Come here.
So, interesting that Jamie brought up the Glasgow smile, and I'm very glad that you did, because history me is going to jump up again. So one of the most recognizable injuries, and one that gets talked a lot about in this case, is the deep cuts extending from the corners of her mouth towards her ears. So this is called, like Jamie said, a Glasgow smile.
And that's what the Joker... Also, something to note, there were ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck, and I quote, an irregular laceration with superficial tissue loss on her right breast. Superficial lacerations on right forearm, left upper arm, and lower side of chest. Trigger warning, gross bodily stuff. Gross, gross, gross. Trigger warning. Skip if you're nauseous. The interesting thing about her being, like, cut in half, not interesting, good, interesting, bad, is that there was very little bruising along the incision line, suggesting that it had been performed after death. There was lacerations on each side of the face, as we mentioned, the corners of the lips, and the skull was not fractured, but there was bruising on the front and right side of her scalp, with an amount of bleeding in the subarachnoid space on the right side, consistent with blows to the head. The cause of death was determined to be hemorrhaging from the lacerations to her face and the shock from the blows to the head and face. Trigger warning, sexual assault. It was also noted that she may have been raped. I won't get too much into that. Their results for sperm were negative, but there was bodily suggestions that she had been sexually assaulted or sexually abused. Anyway. She also had several cuts on her thighs and breasts, and entire portions of flesh had been incised away. Her intestines had been tucked neatly beneath her buttocks as well. While Caitlin is gone, that is my information. Boom. Learning.
Okay, so, where were we? Glasgow smile.
Why it called that?
Alright, Forrest Gump. So the Glasgow smile is also called a Glasgow grin or the Chelsea smile, although there are slight historical differences in usage, but I'm just going to talk about the Glasgow smile. like I said, it's a facial injury where the corners of the mouth are cut towards the ears, which creates the appearance of an exaggerated smile. The name itself, as you can assume, comes from...
Scotland.
Where in Scotland, Jamie?
Glasgow.
Ding! Correct. You're a genius.
Yeah.
Particularly in Glasgow during the late 19th and early to mid 20th centuries. So Glasgow was rough. It still is, don't get me wrong, but it especially was...
It's been rougher.
It was pretty rough at that point. And they were experiencing some periods of severe poverty, of overcrowding, and a lot of gang violence. And in the UK, gang violence usually means there's a lot of knives that are going to be whipped out. Prime example, one that a lot of people know about, the Peaky Blinders. They had razor blades in their hats. There's a lot of cutting going on. And rival gangs were known for using these razors and knives. And one form of intimidation or punishment was to slash the corners of a victim's mouth. The fucked up part about it is that the injury itself doesn't automatically create the smile. The point is not to cut and carve a smile into the person. It's that when the victim screams or their facial muscles move during the healing process, because there's no way to not move your mouth or express even when you're eating, right? That the cuts pull apart. And that's what leaves the scars that resemble this grotesque grin. Which is horrible. Again, despite the name, it's important to point out this injury was not unique to Glasgow. It just unfortunately happened there so often that it became associated with it. And again, there's the Chelsea grin. There's, it was Chelsea, also in the UK. But...
Right.
Historians believe that the nickname was popularized, again, like we talked about with the Black Dahlia. I keep saying the Black Dahlia name, popularized by newspapers, pop culture, sort of placed it onto Glasgow to exaggerate their reputation for violence. Because similar injuries have occurred many places, many different time periods. Glasgow was just a very rough spot. In Elizabeth Short's case, she sustained those deep cuts toward her ears, and it's important to point out, like Jamie also mentioned, that a Glasgow smile specifically, to get pedantic about things, the cut or the injury is happening while the victim is screaming or while the wound is healing. A lot of forensic experts believe that the cuts in Elizabeth's case were made after she had already died, or at the very least was near death and not really able to emote, not really able to show any movements, you know what I mean? That it was kind of used as more of a staging tool for her body rather than as this act of intimidation or torture while she was alive. Which is good to an extent, because it means she might not have had to suffer through that, but also horrible. The purpose of it seems to have been to create that shocking visual effect rather than the point of a Glasgow smile, which was to leave a victim with a permanent reminder of you and what they've done to you. Obviously, because the exact timing of the wounds can't be properly determined, you'll sometimes hear people describe them as just extended facial lacerations rather than definitively referring to them as that Glasgow smile, but it's sort of widely believed that was the intent, to connect those acts. I think it's a difficult thing to discuss, not only for the shock factor, but I think that calling it a Glasgow smile unintentionally romanticizes and sensationalizes the injury even more.
Yeah, I just looked at the pictures of her face. It's not a smile.
No, it's
slices.
Her face is cut, right? So I think it's become another aspect that takes away from her and what was done to her and turns it into this over the top, again, sensationalized portrayal of this Black Dahlia character versus the abuse and murder of Elizabeth Short. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it feels almost more respectful to call them the facial lacerations. But there again, when you look at the point blank of the connections, it also does make sense to refer to it as the Glasgow smile. So you'll see people, point of all that being, you'll see people refer to it as both. It's kind of up to your interpretation.
I also saw some, newspapers saying she had really badly decayed teeth. That's rude.
It's very rude.
Did you need to add that?
Exactly. And the thought of decayed teeth. I'm sure I've mentioned it. I don't do teeth.
Oh, me either.
I really don't do teeth. So, all of this happens. She's posed, and it's very clear that it's deliberate. Her hands are above her head. Her legs are positioned very unnaturally. It almost looks theatrical. And some FBI profilers say that indicates someone who wanted to shock and wanted the public to feel outrage and have this big outcry. Others, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, am I boring you, Jamie? Others on the complete other end of the spectrum think that it reflects a complete emotional detachment where you're not able to give any sort of human qualities to strangers or people around you, because again, we don't know if it was someone that knew her or that it was a completely random act, right?
Well, because from what we've learned, sometimes serial killers will feel guilty that they've killed, and then they position the bodies in a more respectful way, oh, they're just sleeping.
Exactly.
Blah, blah, blah. Nah, this guy was let's make a spectacle of this.
Remember again, I keep saying this as a reminder because it's more of a reminder for me, because I find when I talk about cases like this especially, I think of them in modern terms and with modern approaches. But 1947 was still decades before DNA testing and all of that being accessible at a crime scene. So there's no genetic testing, there's no surveillance cameras, there's no cell phones, there's no digital trail where we can track her phone, where she came from, see what tower pings where. Fingerprints existed, obviously, but they weren't enough. If you didn't have, there was no fingerprint database where you could just put in a finger and you knew what person. If that person hadn't...
They did keep track,
though.
She had fingerprints.
They kept track, absolutely. But what I mean by that is if someone committed a crime but hadn't committed a crime previously, there was no way to be like, oh, that's John Doe's finger. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They found her prints on her.
Yes, exactly.
Because she had gotten arrested prior for, was it drinking as a minor or something?
Yeah, something like that. Something
silly.
She's just a girl.
Yeah.
We've all done it.
I'm just a girl.
But so, fingerprints weren't enough. Hair analysis was primitive, but it was there. But if you're not finding hair with the root, you're shit out of luck. Blood typing was limited. There's not a lot of blood that you're getting from an exsanguinated body. So investigators were basically trying to solve a puzzle with no pieces. Which, I don't know if you've ever tried to do that. not gonna happen. Not easy. So soon after news of this broke, the newspapers exploded. Everything became sensationalized, and to a certain extent, I can really understand. I'm sure that this was horrifying. To think that something like this had happened in your neighborhood, in your city, even in your country, is awful. And to think that there was no explanation of why, how, who, and that it could just happen again, maybe to one of your loved ones, that must have been terrifying. Problem being, there again, the newspapers really latched on to that as their driving force for getting people to read their articles. And as is the case, we talked about with the Son of Sam, we talked about with the Zodiac Killer, that brings the crazies to the newspapers. There's a lot of people who want to get their jollies from messing with people in these circumstances. However, sometimes it's also really the person who did it. So at some point shortly after this media coverage exploded, someone mailed Elizabeth's belongings to the press. These items specifically had been cleaned with gasoline, so there was no usable fingerprints, and it was very clear that the sender enjoyed taunting not only the press, but investigators.
Yeah, so in the packet with the birth certificate, business cards, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. And the envelope read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." The same day that the packet was received, they sent it off for FBI testing. They also found a handbag and a black suede shoe that were reported to have been seen on top of a garbage can in an alley a short distance, about 2 miles, 3 kilometers from the crime scene. The items were recovered, but they had been wiped clean with gasoline, destroying any fingerprints. So I think that was somebody doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing. But again, nothing we could do. On March 14th, an apparent suicide note had been scrawled in pencil on a bit of paper that was found tucked into a shoe in a pile of men's clothes by the ocean's edge in Venice. The note read, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for this one. Couldn't help myself for that or this. Sorry, Mary." The clothes had included a coat and trousers, a brown and white t-shirt, white jockey shorts, tan socks, and moccasin leather shoes about size 8. The clothes gave no clue about the identity of the owner. Obviously, Mark Hansen was deemed a suspect because his name was on the address book that was found in the packet. Blah, blah, blah. On January 26th, another letter was received by the Examiner. This time it was handwritten as well, which it read, "Here it is, turning in Wednesday, January 29th at 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger." The letter also named a location at which the supposed killer would turn himself in. Police waited at that location on the morning of January 29th, but the alleged killer did not appear. Instead, at 1 p.m., the Examiner's office received another cut-and-pasted letter, which read, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified."
Whether this person was truly the killer remains very debated, but it's always kind of a question in the back of people's minds when looking at this case of, did this person want the commendment? Did they want the attention? Or was this really just someone fucking with people? Neither option is good, but it's another piece of the puzzle that is missing. It's that portion to me is as if you got an expansion pack for your puzzle that made it longer and then also came with no pieces.
Right.
Which is horrible. So obviously we get to a point where we need to find some suspects. We need to start figuring out what the fuck is going on. And over the decades, there have been more than 150 people suggested as the suspects in this case. There's been doctors, there's been actors, there's been gangsters, serial killers, even police officers. But no definitive evidence. And there's a lot of speculation across the board, and that's true for every suspect, but there has not been evidence. And every theory holds its own, but it eventually runs into the same problem where there is no proof. However, there were a handful of famous suspects, you can say.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of amateur sleuths, you can say, us, that
I was just gonna say
that have sort of championed their own perfect suspect, but all of them rely on circumstantial evidence and speculation. So I'm going to present these suspects, but take it with a healthy dose of skepticism across the board. I have my theories for who I think. Again, as an amateur sleuth myself, I have my theories, but none of them hold anything without proof.
Yeah.
So, the first person to talk about is the most famous suspect, a man named Dr. George. I don't know if it's Hodel or Hodel. I think Hodel.
I feel like Hodel.
Hodel feels right saying it out loud, but I've been reading Hodel. Do you?
Hodel sounds less scary, so.
There you go. All right. Fair. So, talking about Dr. George Hodel, if you've watched any documentary or read anything on the Black Dahlia case, you've almost certainly heard this man's name. So George Hodel was a Los Angeles physician who lived a very, let's say, unconventional life. He associated with artists and musicians and intellectuals, very LA sort of deal. He hosted lavish parties at his house, which was striking. It was called the Sowden House. Beautiful. So why did he become a suspect? Great question. In 2003, his son Steve published a book arguing that his father murdered Elizabeth Short.
Right.
Which must have been crazy for both of them. To think that your son thinks you're a murderer, and to grow up thinking that your father is one of the most infamous murderers in American history. Steve's evidence that he laid out in his book was that his father had medical training and anatomical knowledge. He lived in LA, obviously, at the time. He had a history of sexual misconduct and was tried but acquitted for sexually abusing his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
The LAPD had secretly bugged his house in 1950 while investigating him for another circumstance. And during one recorded conversation, this was really the kicker for Steve, during one of these recorded conversations, George allegedly said, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now." But there again, the problem, that quote is often taken out of context. And
Right.
detectives that were listening to that wiretap never arrested him for Elizabeth's murder. And the recording is ambiguous. We don't... I hate to come across like I'm defending him in any way, because he was a horrible man regardless. But
Yeah.
it's the same level of speculation that Jamie and I have had recorded on this show, where we've been like, if I was in that position, I feel like I could get away with it. You can't take a person to jail.
Boom, guilty.
Exactly. You can't take a person to jail for the rest of their life off of that. And as is the case with all of these suspects, there is no physical evidence that connects George Hodel to Elizabeth Short. a lot of people think that this is an intriguing case and that Steve's arguments have a lot of ground to them. But again, it's one that relies heavily, heavily, heavily on interpretation rather than proof. Do I think that George Hodel was a terrible guy? Yeah. Do I think he did some fucked up things? Absolutely. Do I think Steve has every right to not have wanted a relationship with his father and think that his father was terrible? 1,000%. Does that make him the Black Dahlia killer? No. That brings us to point 2. Leslie Dillon. So Leslie Dillon wasn't originally a suspect. He kind of looped himself into being a prime suspect. He actually contacted investigators himself. So, I shouldn't laugh. Leslie wrote letters discussing things like criminal psychology and suggested that whoever committed the murder likely had medical knowledge. Trying to help out, he was an armchair sleuth trying to help out the cops. Unfortunately for him, detectives wanted to know who was sending them this information and discovered that he had worked around funeral homes and had anatomical knowledge and now had an interest in this case. He was interrogated extensively. And at one point, police thought they solved the case. They were adamant that this was the killer. Then everything fell apart because his alibi checked out.
Well, yes.
They took him, they tried to prosecute him, but the district attorney refused to prosecute because there was no evidence and he was not in the area. Now it's sort of widely believed that Leslie Dillon was a very eccentric man, without a doubt, but he became entangled in the investigation. He was not a real suspect. Yeah. So, there again, it goes to show how speculation can really get in the way of everything you need it to avoid. The third suspect I want to talk about is a man named Dr. Walter Bailey. I'm going to do kind of like a top 5 with a bonus in here.
I was going to say, none of the ones I see are the ones that you've sent so
Because there
far.
again, there's 150 suspects.
I have, neighbors seemed suspicious in a van nearby.
Well, exactly. So think about the reality of it is that everyone became suspicious. There was people calling, and they would have been calling nonstop to these police hotlines to say...
There was 60 false confessions.
Absolutely. And that's what I was talking about with the... people sending stuff into newspapers, too. Some people just see an opportunity for fame, regardless of positive or negative, and they want in on it.
That's
which is
so stupid, respectfully.
Crazy. Absolutely. Disrespectfully, that's fucking stupid.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Walter Bailey is a popular suspect among armchair detectives, again. So... This theory suggests that he was a surgeon, which he was. He supposedly knew Elizabeth's family through social connections, very loosely knew her family. And basically just that his medical background could explain the precision in the dismemberment. Unfortunately, with this theory, it's basically just he could have known Elizabeth and he was a doctor. There's really not a lot more backing to it. There is almost no direct evidence of him being linked to Elizabeth herself. And he's definitely an interesting possibility if there was a more direct connection, but I don't consider this to be a very fruitful theory.
There was a lot of theories and potentially related crimes that, were considered, but again, weren't pursued necessarily during her suspect situation. People suspected that maybe the lipstick murders had a connection, or that the Cleveland Torso murders were a related crime, both of which got snuffed out, but just there was a lot of lone woman murders themselves that people thought maybe she was just one of a bunch. It could have been one person doing all of them, or a bunch of men just being awful. Between 1943 and 1949, there was over a dozen unsolved murders that occurred in Los Angeles of young women who were sexually mutilated. So she could have been just one of the few in a not special way, but she became special in the media's eyes. They also said a lot of rumors that we don't really give any credence to. They were saying that she was like a lesbian and that she was pregnant, she was a prostitute, she was like a tease where she'd like flirt with men and then like not go home with them, like all of these things. And it's like, okay, this is all just speculation with no proof. Let's have some decency and respect. And yeah, that's that.
The fourth suspect is a man named Mark Hansen. Okay, yes, we finally have an overlap. So Mark Hansen was the owner of a nightclub who had at one point allowed Elizabeth to stay at one of his properties for a time. Police obviously looked at him because he knew Elizabeth personally. She had access to his social circle, and that his name appeared in her address book. Some people, again, going back to how sensationalized this became, some people speculated that he was romantically interested in her, she rejected him, he lost his mind. Again, no physical evidence ever really connected him to her murder. Horrible. Just anyone who had any minor connection to this woman, there was an accusation. And again, I don't think that's a terrible thing. I should clarify. I think you should go in guns a-blazing and try to get answers from whoever possible, but I think the internet has really spun deep onto these people too, which is crazy. So going off again of theories like that, one of the more popular suspects as well is Patrick S. O'Reilly, who was another acquaintance of Elizabeth. He admitted that he had had feelings for her, and some investigators thought that his behavior in the people that he spoke to, the things that he was saying, the interest that he may have had in the case, that this was suspicious. But once again, no forensic evidence, no witnesses, no confession, nothing strong enough to be able to move forward with a prosecution. Like Jamie said, there was dozens of people who had made false confessions, between 50 and 60 people who made false confessions directly to police. Some people were suffering from mental illness, others just plain wanted attention. Some were already incarcerated and kind of they had nothing to lose. They were already there for life, and they wanted that prison, I don't know, respect of like being this
rep.
Yeah. It guaranteed a level.
Black Dahlia.
It guaranteed a level of publicity. And again, this is a situation where people weren't looking at if it was good or bad publicity. There's no such thing as bad publicity. If you're being accused of murder, it's probably bad. But there again,
I would think so.
There again, look at all of the murderers that are in prison that were getting fucking fan mail. So. But at the end of the day, every confession also fell through the cracks because they had no evidence, because they weren't the ones that did it. I think what's worth discussing about that is I think investigators and the general public became too focused on finding a brilliant surgeon and these people that were directly linked to medical fields, butchers, morticians, that sort of thing, and overlooked the more ordinary suspects that had more hands-on anatomical experience, people who were on farms, people who were around animals. Like, expertise doesn't always come from degrees, being my point. And it's very easy to set blinders and miss really big pieces of information. It's also, I think, the level of uncertainty on suspects and that sort of gap that keeps people interested in the Black Dahlia case. Mm-hmm. I said before she was linked to Red Manley. He was obviously potentially the last person to see her alive, the last documented person at the very least. So he was obviously interviewed. He cooperated with the police immediately. He passed multiple lie detector tests, which...
That means nothing.
I was going to say, wasn't considered reliable evidence then or now, but is still something that was done as a general principle. And he had his timeline corroborated that he may have dropped her off and seen her, but that was the last time. So no one can say with confidence from that point who she met, where she went, where she spent the next several days, or who was truly the last person to see her alive.
I don't trust Mark, but I have no...
I just don't like him. I just don't like his name.
It's my gut feeling, I don't know. I don't trust that guy, even if he didn't do it, sums up.
So, all of that to say, again, I'm not going to go through 150 suspects, but the Black Dahlia murder became larger than life. There were books about it. There's movies, podcasts, there's TV shows, there's countless documentaries. And I think the reason it continues to fascinate people isn't because it was brutal. No one wants to think about something horrible happening to someone. It's because it feels unfinished. And as a general principle of humanity, we like stories with endings. This one doesn't have one. It's the same reason... I could talk about Zodiac Killer again. Zodiac. Jack the Ripper. These bigger-than-life cases that we will never have definitive answers to. And from a human perspective, Elizabeth never received justice. And kind of since her murder, every generation seems to believe that maybe they'll be the ones to solve it. And I hope to God that somebody does. I mean, from what I've seen of her, the little that we do know, she seemed great. And the unfortunate reality is when people remember Elizabeth Short, they usually remember photographs of a crime scene. And to kind of finish up my thoughts on everything, I would really like to remember her as something else. She was a young woman from Massachusetts. She was a daughter. She was a sister. She was someone who dreamed of... Wow, motherhood has made me soft. I'm getting a little... Woo.
Deep breaths.
She was someone who dreamed of a better future, and she deserved far more than becoming a headline, and that being her legacy. And I think that's the saddest part, is that the nickname lived forever and Elizabeth didn't.
Oof.
And that's my thoughts on the Black Dahlia case.
Well, should I end it on something light?
Yes.
Hopefully.
Please.
So, beautifully said. There has been some, not revelations, but like progress, I'd say, potentially in the case.
Absolutely.
And that's why I thought it was fate, because when I was researching it, it got published that day. So I found an article published on July 6th of this year, and it was talking about how a team behind the currently in development docuseries Deconstructing Dahlia claimed it had found a concealed room in a 1940s Los Angeles motel that may have been a place where Short was killed. People first reported this on July 1st, and the Los Angeles Magazine followed a couple days after, getting more detail. The team had spent more than 60 hours dismantling the room. They found the original plaster beneath layers of drywall and paint, and they documented close to 40 suspected blood samples.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, so they submitted those for advanced ancient DNA testing, and the motel has not been, like, stated, like, this is where she was murdered. So, again, it's all speculation, but also, if it's not her blood, that's still 40 other suspected blood samples that they could solve.
Absolutely, and I think, that's a really good point to make, is even if it's not her, and even right now, if it's just speculation, that's all we have in general. So if it's a certain type of speculation that can bring some closure to 40 other families, that's a huge revelation.
Because even if it's not Black Dahlia related, hey, that could have been a serial killer working out of this motel.
Exactly. Or we're
like, that could explain a bunch of other
We're
stuff.
back to America's first serial killer and his killer hotel. There we go. Well,
boom.
I think, with that said, I think that wraps up Jamie's birthday episode.
It was so fun and lighthearted.
It was
and totally
super chill, really
not gruesome at all. Happy 27th.
Happy 27th, Jamie. Wild. Thank you for listening to Creeps and Coffee. Thank you for joining us. We are so glad you could come to celebrate another birthday with us.
Join the Patreon for my birthday.
Yeah, there we go. That's a good idea. So if you would like to leave any comments, leave any thoughts on Elizabeth Short, on the idea of the Black Dahlia, let me know if you guys have a certain person that you think makes a compelling suspect, or if you'd like to hear anything else. If you want to interact with us at all, you can leave a comment on our Instagram or our Twitter at creepsandcoffee. You can send us an email at creepsandcoffee@gmail.com.
Yep.
Or, like Jamie said, if you want to really celebrate her birthday, you can help support the show by checking out our Patreon to get exclusive behind-the-scenes access to our process, our innermost thoughts and feelings, and access to a very special bonus episode every month. There is a free version of our Patreon, but there is also a paid tier, which we would love to have you join us on.
Give me a gift for my birthday.
There you go. Come hang out with us. Be our BFFs.
Or just for free follow, because I would take that
Come
too.
be our BFFs, you know? Come hang out with us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. It was so wonderful to be back, and I look forward to my next episode with you guys. Until we meet again, my sweet babies. Creeps and Coffee is produced and edited by us, Kate and Jaim.
Our theme music is Stuck in a Hole by Dated.
For more information on where to find them, check out the link in our show notes. And to connect with us, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Creeps and Coffee.